Introduction to India's foreign policy is our first chapter. In fact, I would like to give a broad outline of everything about the foreign policy. Various aspects are involved in it. And this is also very important in the exam point of view, because that broader perspective is very important in answering many of these questions these days. In fact, there are many subtopics within that. For example, in the introduction, I would like to talk about the objectives of Nehruvian foreign policy and its relevance today. It's a very important aspect. Similarly, the basic principles of our foreign policy, and are we sticking to this foreign policy even today? That's a big issue right now, because we talk about idealism, realism and all. Are we really sticking to the the basic principles? Then one of the objectives of the foreign policy was to to take care of the persons of Indian origin and their interests, their problems, etc. in the world. I would like to talk about that also in this context. Then one of the the principles, or the basic principle, is in joining the Commonwealth. And why India joined Commonwealth? What is Commonwealth? Then the concept of colonialism, imperialism, neo-colonialism, etc. I would like to discuss that. Then nuclear disarmament is a big issue. Right from the beginning, Nehru was in the forefront for the nuclear disarmament. And then what is our present position about the nuclear disarmament? Then how the foreign policy has evolved from an idealism to some sort of a realism today. And some of the salient features of the present day foreign policy. Then strategic partnership, Cold War, end of the Cold War, the present world order, Panchsheel, Bandung Conference, Gujarat Doctrine. These are some of the basic aspects, and in the introductory chapter, I would like to discuss all these things. And coming to the specific topic, so around 14-15 different areas I will be discussing in the introduction to India's foreign policy. And the first major subheading or subtopic is the objectives of the Nehruvian foreign policy. Let me talk about the objectives. Objectives of the Nehruvian policy. And the discussion here is it relevant even today? I mean, Nehruvian foreign policy was there, and is it relevant? That is the next question, because many a times the question mark is, we are talking about what we started almost 70 years before. Is it relevant today? That is the question. So first of all, foreign policy. What do you mean by foreign policy in the first place? Foreign policy refers to the sum total of principles, interests and objectives which a country promotes while interacting with other countries. The principles, the interests and the objectives which a country promote while interacting with other countries. And there is, there can be certain basic features, but it is not a fixed concept. It will change as society evolves, as the relationship between the countries evolve. The foreign policy objectives and principles will definitely change. It is not a fixed concept. There is no doubt regarding that. But the thrust of the foreign policy, when it changes, especially in the changing world order. See, when after the pandemic, after the corona pandemic, the objectives of the foreign policy, and even during the pandemic, the objectives are totally different. Now, how to survive, how to float in the international arena, that may be the main concern. So it keeps on changing, and India's foreign policy is shaped by several factors, no doubt, including its history, its culture, its geography, its economy, the mindset of the freedom fighters, the mindset of the first Prime Minister Nehru, all mattered, because this is something which has evolved because of the leadership. The way the leader is, the country will be. So the Nehruvian concept was so strong, he was so convinced about certain things, and that is how these policies emerged during his time. So Nehru was a visionary. So he had a vision for the country. See, the difference is, at that time in 1947 or 46, when we got independence in 1947, there was nothing to fall back. We had to start from the scratch. We had to create an institution. We had to create democracy. We had to create our government. We had to create parliament, judiciary, foreign policy, everything had to start from scratch. The work at that time was much more tedious and difficult than what is there today. Today we have an institution. We have to only work on the existing institution. It's very easy to build on that. But start from the scratch, start from zero, start from negative or from nothing. That is the biggest challenge. So the objectives of the foreign policy, the principles and objectives of the foreign policy were first outlined by Pandit Nehru in 1946. In a broadcast to the nation through All India Radio. In those days, There was no other medium in which we could communicate. Even the Nehru, then Mahatma Gandhi, all these major leaders, main leaders used to communicate to the people through All India Radio. So, the broadcast to the nation in 1946. Prime Minister Nehru at that time, today Prime Minister deals with through Man Ki Baat. So, since there was no other medium at that time, Prime Minister Nehru also had his own Man Ki Baat, we can say. He used to communicate to the people through the broadcast, through the All India Radio broadcast. And he talked about 5 principles and objectives of the foreign policy. The first one, the first objective for preservation of territorial integrity and sovereignty of India. Preservation of territorial integrity and sovereignty of India. So, this was a major objective. We have to see, even today, one of our major objectives of foreign policy is to ensure that our territorial integrity is protected. Jammu and Kashmir or the various, the northeastern states. We want to protect our country and the state, even the districts from any aggression from Pakistan, any aggression from China. Even today, we are pursuing it very seriously. So, even the cross-border terrorism is a major concern for us. So, preserving our territorial integrity and sovereignty is an objective even today. That was an objective right from the beginning. When India was formed, the boundaries were not very clear. British India, the Britishers withdrew from India, and the independent India had to protect the borders. So, one major objective was preservation of territorial integrity and sovereignty of it. Second was promotion of international peace. See, Nehruvian objective was promotion of international peace. International peace. See, Nehru was an international leader. He was the leader of the third world. He was the leader of the colonies. I mean, the countries who were coming out of the colonies in Asia as well as in Africa. He always spoke on behalf of Asia and Africa. So, he had a larger world vision, a larger vision about the humanity. He wanted to fight against racialism, he wanted to fight against imperialism, he wanted to fight against colonialism. So, he was a global leader, and moreover, in 1946 when he came out with the objective, please remember, we have just come out of the Second World War. Second World War just ended. We have seen the horrific effects of the Second World War, the nuclear weapons we have seen. So, promotion of international peace was a concern for all the leaders at that time. Since Nehru was a global leader, an international leader, and a leader of great repute, and a spokesperson of the third world countries, he had always international peace in mind, and he said India's foreign policy objective is also to promote international peace. So, international peace, promotion of international peace was a major objective of India's foreign policy. And third foreign policy objective, now coming to the third foreign policy objective. So, one is preservation of territorial integrity and sovereignty. Number 2, promotion of international peace. Third is economic development of the country. A very interesting aspect is economic development of the country. Now, generally, we may have a feeling that, economic, when Prime Minister Modi visits various countries, or Prime Minister Manmohan Singh visited during the UPA time. So, even any future leader also, any leader who comes up, see, they are all talking about economic development. Any bilateral visit, President Trump's visit to India, or Indian Prime Minister's visit to US, or Indian Prime Minister's visit to Japan and vice versa, or to Russia, the main concern is economic development, economic cooperation, how to increase our bilateral trade, how to balance or how to increase our export and minimize or rather how to cooperate and collaborate in the export-import business. So, that is a major concern for all the leaders right now. But what I am trying to say is that this is not a new concept. It's not something we have invented in the 21st century or after the economic liberalization. It's not a concept of economic liberalization alone. Even Prime Minister Nehru talked about economic development of the country as a major objective of our foreign policy. But the only problem was that at that time, I am talking about 1950s and early 60s, the world might not have been ready for talking only about economic development, because their main concern at that time was survival, peace, how to prevent a third world war, how to prevent nuclear attacks in future. So their main discourse, the main discussion would have been about how to prevent war. They were talking about military alliances at that time. The Cold War was on at that time. The NATO alliance was created. Non-aligned movement discussion was going on. Warsaw Pact was happening. So their main concern was survival, not economic development. Maybe because of that we could not do much, or rather the progress in the economic development of the country as a major objective foreign policy might not have been working that beautifully at that time, because the rest of the world was not ready for talking about economic development the way. See, today, a simple thing, during the corona pandemic, world may not be talking much about the bilateral trade. We will be only talking about how to prevent this disease from spreading and how to minimize the death, because we are busy controlling the death, busy controlling the spread of the pandemic. And during this time, we may not be talking about economic growth as such. We are not worried about economic growth. We are more worried about a larger problem, that is the pandemic. So economic development of the country was a major objective even for Nehru. Even today it is an objective. Today it is more. Most of our discussions are economic development. Business delegations are traveling along with the prime ministers and presidents for bilateral visits only to promote the economic interest of the country. So third objective is economic development of the country. The fourth objective, a very interesting thing again, protection of interests of people of Indian origin abroad. People of Indian origin abroad. Protection of interests of people of Indian origin abroad. See, in fact, India during the colonial time, many Indians travelled across the world as a part of the colonial policy, and also in pursuance of larger interest of or economic interest for better jobs, better opportunities, Indians travelled across the world. So many countries, or not only the developed world, even the developing countries, in Fiji, in Caribbean islands, in Africa, in Hong Kong, in East Asian countries, many East Asian countries, in Malaysia, in Singapore. So Indians, Sri Lanka, Indians were taken by Britishers and other colonial masters for work, and many Indians got settled in various parts of the world. Now, when India got independence, Prime Minister Nehru knew that we as an independent country should take responsibility of the welfare of these people also. We should protect them. Their interests should be protected. See, if they are butchered, or if they are racially discriminated, if their economic interests are not taken care, naturally they may even think of coming back to India. It may be an economic burden for India also. So, as a part of our policy and the objective, the protection of interests of people of Indian origin who migrated from India during the British time, we were very much concerned. Nehru wanted to ensure that their interests are protected. Even today, when you look back, when there is a pandemic, or when there is a problem, when there is an economic crisis, or if there is a war like situation in West Asia, India is always worried about people of Indian origin, and we would like to protect them. Even today, if something goes wrong, we would like to bring them back to the country or protect them. So this is part of our foreign policy even today. Though even today, India's one of the objectives of the Indian foreign policy is protection of people of Indian origin abroad, no doubt. And the fifth is freedom of dependent people. Freedom of dependent people and elimination of racial discrimination. Elimination of racial discrimination. And see, in fact, we are talking about 1946. This broadcast to the nation was in 1946. Nehru talked about that. Even today, there may not be many dependent people because decolonization has already happened in the 1950s and 60s across the world. But racial discrimination continues even today. But at that time, the racial discrimination was much more than what is there today. Today, the degree of racial discrimination may be less. There may not be many dependent people, but even today, the issues of imperialism, the issues of the big countries and the developed countries trying to control the developing countries, the neo-colonialism or neo-imperialism, what we call, the modern ways of, new ways of controlling the developing countries and their resources are still continuing. So, as a part of our foreign policy objective, we would like to ensure that the world is free and no people are subjugated to any undue pressure or their resources are not been manipulated by the developed countries, India is a major spokesperson for all these countries. So, India is a spokesperson for South Asia. We would like to speak on behalf of South Asia, we would like to speak on behalf of even African countries for that matter. So, our perspective regarding the dependent people and elimination of racial discrimination still continues to be the same. Of course, the degree of problem may be comparatively less. So, there are 5 major objectives of Nehruvian foreign policy, and all those 5 objectives are still relevant. And if you look at the objectives once again, preservation of territorial integrity, definitely yes, in Kashmir, against Pakistan, against China, promotion of international peace, yes, we would like to play a major role. But of course, in 1946, the issue was much more complex, issue was much more grave because of the end of the Second World War and the beginning of the Cold War. Then economic development of the country, definitely we are pursuing in a big way. Protection of interests of people of Indian origin abroad, we are still pursuing. Freedom of dependent people, not many dependent people right now, but elimination of racial discrimination, we are against all forms of discrimination. We fight for the rights of the people, that still continues. So, all these objectives are still, so these are evergreen, we can say. These are very much relevant and still relevant, and India is pursuing all these 5 objectives even today with full seriousness. So, there could be a question. The question is, analyze the objectives of Indian foreign policy or Nehruvian foreign policy. Do you think it is still relevant today? It can be a 200-word question or a 250-word question. Be ready for this kind of a question.